You were made to be ruled. In the end, it'll be every man for himself.
What do we do?
We get ready.
There was an idea to bring together a group of remarkable people. So when we needed them, they could fight the battles that we never could. Gentlemen,
What are you prepared to do?
No offense, but I don't play well with others.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that away. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. If we can't protect the Earth, you can be damn sure we'll avenge it. Dr. Banner, your work is unparalleled, and I'm a huge fan of the way you lose control and turn into an enormous green rage monster.
Thanks.
Elliott?
It would help if I unmuted my mic. Yes, I know. That would be like 20 years ago when that movie hit. No, I'm sorry. 10 years. Wait, that was 2012, right?
Yes, it's exactly 10 years.
Exactly 10 years ago when the Avengers would hit movie theaters. And that's when you would have what I would say truly the arrival of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It would be Marvel's biggest hit to date to that at that point, raking in $1 billion in box office. Yes, folks, $1 billion with a B, and pretty much setting the standard for all future MCU movies. So anyway, hey everyone, my name is Elliott Serrano. I am joined by John Clarke, Stephen Brown, and Dave Pinto. Today on the MCU ReVU, we're bringing together two podcasts. You're getting two podcasts for the price of one. It's the Caffeinated Comics duo of John and Stephen joining up with the Shaken Not Heard pair of Dave and myself, and we are bringing phase one of the MCU ReVU to a close by looking at the Avengers. So let me start. How are you guys doing, everyone? Before I get into how I'm doing, how are you all doing? Steve, you're probably the newest of the new. So tell me, how's the week been?
So far, so good. Long work shoot, but we're all done here. So I'm no complaints. I did actually watch this movie again in preparation, so I did my homework for once.
And how many times have you seen it?
Hard to say. Many times. Hundreds, probably, conservatively.
Yeah, I feel like, Stephen, this movie for you is your Raiders of the Lost Ark for me, or Elliott, or your Goldfinger for Dave. But you are probably going to be the biggest expert out of the four of us, because this is a movie that you were waiting for pretty much always.
Yeah.
And not let down in any way.
No, definitely not. I will say, though, that trailer is awful.
Yeah, I haven't seen that in 10 years.
No, I don't know that I've seen that trailer probably since before the movie came out, and I'm like, this is not a good trailer. It's kind of staggering how bad it is. It's just it looks like a really, really old action movie, and it's like a lot older than 10 years.
Yeah, well, it looks very typical. It looks like, hey, here's your next action movie. It might as well be Ghost Rider or even Incredible Hulk or Steel or Catwoman. It's got like a Ben Affleck Daredevilness to the trailer.
It does.
You could tell they didn't know how game changing this was, and watching it again, I just finished it before we started. This to me is really the first MCU movie. We've been talking for weeks about like, oh, they haven't quite got it together yet. They haven't quite created it. Oh, look, they're touching on things they'll do. This movie is like ground zero of the MCU. Everything that the MCU has done, other than introduce certain characters, is in this movie.
Yeah.
Dave?
I want to go to bat for a second for the trailer. I don't think it's that bad. I think that
I'm glad somebody likes it.
It's not so much I like it. I just think that all movie trailers now are so we expect them to be a certain way, like the tinkly piano version of a slow down piano version of the theme played over like these sweeping like camera dolly shots. And it's like, yeah, this feels older, but I don't really think it's a bad trailer, but it does feel dated. And then you've got like the hard rock music at the end. That probably is the thing that dates it the most.
Yeah, and what's that 9 Inch Nails? Because if
Trent Reznor is timeless. Trent Reznor is timeless.
Fair enough.
Trent Reznor is timeless if your time is 1998.
Well, it does seem that's when this trailer is from.
It was for Spawn originally.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like the trailer they played before, like the first X-Men movie or Blade.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, at least it's you mentioned Daredevil. At least it's not Evanescence as the song.
Yeah.
As was
or Nickelback with Spider-Man.
Yeah. But then that was Lunatic Calm for the Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, I feel like we're gonna have to do episodes on the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. Now that the MCU brought them all together in No Way Home, and also just to discuss Macy Gray for like 12 minutes.
Which is, yeah, all right.
And that's another thing you want to talk about dating this. I completely forgot this movie ends with a Chris Cornell song.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a very non-memorable Chris Cornell song, as opposed to You Know My Name in Casino Royale, which I think is one of his best songs. Even outside of film soundtracks. And this is just like this. You talk about the trailer being from 1998. That song is like a Soundgarden leftover that Audioslave wouldn't touch.
Wow. Oh yeah, I mean there was a time when you'd have songs just thrown on soundtracks just to get them released. So I mean I who have collected many a soundtrack, which is essentially a compilation of different songs that were put on. Like I remember the Roland and Emmerich Godzilla, where you had the P. Diddy track "Come With Me" that was used as a on the Godzilla soundtrack. The Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack, which had Limp Bizkit sampling the MI theme. So yeah, that was a thing.
In my older days, I performed the U2 B-side that they threw onto Batman Forever.
Oh, that's right. I remember that one. Yes.
And I pushed for that. I said, we're gonna do Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me. No one cared.
No one cared. But what you needed was like a Batman cosplayer in the background. People going, why? What?
Just to confuse people even more. Or just someone acting like Jim Carrey.
Yes. Riddler. Right. Okay. So, full disclosure. While I did rewatch the Avengers, I did not rewatch it this past weekend, because this past weekend, the weekend got away from me. And before we came on air, John was filling everybody else in on what happened last night, which was essentially John Clarke came over to my house. We pulled out all my long boxes, which used to be in this spot here behind me. And so he could find all the Web of Spider-Mans that I told him I owned, which apparently disappeared. They weren't in the boxes somehow.
There were 4 of them. And I took all of them.
You took all of them, as well as a bunch of other Spider-Man books. And which, take it. Please, for the love of the baby Jesus, take these comics away from me. I have so many right now, and it's not causing me a small bit of anxiety right now, knowing that all my long boxes are out in my dining room still. And the reason you can't, folks who are watching this on the live stream, the reason you can't see my bookshelves with all my tchotchkes on it anymore is because that whole area is crowded with junk, and I can't even get a chair in there. So I had to flip the camera around so I could be here. But on the bright side,
boxes out from behind you. That's
yes. And soon this spot will be full again. But still, I did get this sweet Han Solo out of the deal because John couldn't try to compensate me for the comics, as well as a Battle of Endor playset, which
the bunker.
With the bunker.
Which, by the way, if you put that together, it has both sets of doors.
Oh, sweet.
As the doors, and then you can slide the blast doors on top of the doors.
So that means now I'm going to need to get the 3.5-inch Han Solo in Endor gear to try to hotwire the door.
He didn't wear the trench coat in that scene. You could just get a New Hope Han Solo, which I'm sure you own.
I do have a New Hope Han Solo.
You could just put a vest Han Solo in there and be fine. I'm not making you spend money.
No one's twisting your arm, Elliott.
No one's doing it yet. But
I appreciate you giving into my OCD, because I was downsizing my comic collection a couple of years ago when I moved, and I sold off 4/5 of it. And when I got to Amazing Spider-Man, I was like, I can't let these go. I just need to keep them. And now a couple of years later, I'm like, what about all those other bad Spider-Man series that cross over into Amazing Spider-Man? I no longer have those, and that's really bothering me.
And Steven, you'd cry if you'd see all the stuff that I have that didn't get bagged and boarded.
Oh, shame on you, Elliott. You know better.
Like, after a while, I gave up. I just started throwing stuff in the boxes and forgetting about it. But anyway,
number one, the Frank Miller Wolverine is in no bag and no board and just crushed up against other comics from the early 80s.
But the fact that it was all slapped together like that actually helped preserve it nicely, because it looks the gloss.
Not as nice as a bag and board would.
I know. But the cover's still nice and glossy. Everything. I was like, But anyway, but all that stuff. Once I get everything in order, all that stuff will be bagged and boarded and back in order, and then this will be a mess again. Anyway, enough about that.
There was a lot of Avengers in your collection, and that's what we're talking about.
Yes, and so back to Marvel's The Avengers. Again, like we said, that you guys have hit the nail on the head. I remember. Okay, I didn't watch it this past weekend, but I did watch it like a week or two ago, and I remember going, "Wow, this movie really." When you look at the structure of it, it's real simple. I mean, Joss Whedon puts the film together, and kind of follows a similar, or maybe the Russos followed Joss Whedon's formula from this, where when you look at Infinity War, when the Russos introduce each character as they go to set up Infinity War, he gives, it's essentially like a mini movie of that character within the greater film until everyone meets and all their paths cross. Joss Whedon does the same thing, opens up, essentially introducing every character as they go. Then you have the traditional superheroes fight before they become friends, and then they all unite against the greater baddie. You guys said this last week. I remember when I said, do you need to see Iron Man 2? Because that's where we get Natasha Romanoff. He introduced Black Widow for the first time. Well, Joss Whedon does a great job of introducing her here. So in a way, you probably maybe didn't really need to see Iron Man 2 to get her character here. But you move through, and all the little character dynamics that worked wonderfully, that really surprised me. I never thought you could get Cap and Iron Man as they were created in the movies and get that same kind of synergy as you had in the comic books, and boom, it happened here. Especially when you get to by the time you get to the end of the Battle of New York, and Cap has settled into his leadership role, which I'm going to tell you, if anybody but Joss Whedon is writing this screenplay, I bet somebody else tries to make Iron Man the leader of the team. What do you guys think?
I think that was definitely the threat going in, because Iron Man was the biggest hit of all of those films. That it could have very easily been Iron Man and His Amazing Friends. And to be fair, Robert Downey Jr. does walk through this movie like a movie star. Everyone else is playing this like a character actor. But when Tony's revealed and he basically comes out of the Iron Man suit in this display that looks like a Warner Brothers cartoon, because it's just all spirals, and it's all there to accentuate him and his face when he's revealed. Nobody gets an introduction like that. You know, Cap's hitting a punching bag, Black Widow's tied to a chair, Mark Ruffalo's in the shadows. No one is introduced as grandly as Robert Downey. But you're right, it's balanced. But Stephen, how did you think the balance was between those characters?
Yeah, I mean, I remember going into the movie being really concerned. You said like that it was going to be Iron Man and His Amazing Friends, and I remember thinking at the time, like when it was coming out, you're getting excited and you're like, oh no, it's like there's a lot of personality with Robert Downey Jr. And is everyone else going to be able to kind of find the right balance? And I didn't really know Joss Whedon too much. I hadn't really watched Buffy or anything like this. I'd read like the Astonishing X-Men comic book, and I liked that. So, and I knew he was famous for like ensembles. So I was like, all right, well, this guy will kind of figure it out, hopefully. And it's actually pretty well balanced. It's like whether that's like multiple people should get credit for that, but I was pleasantly surprised that it's not too much like the Robert Downey Jr. show, and it very, very easily could have been. And I think a lot of that comes from like Chris Evans being as good as he is. You know, they don't put a lot of Thor and Iron Man together. They fight in the movie, but I don't know that Chris Hemsworth was in a place to like be able to stand toe to toe with Robert Downey Jr. at the time, but Chris Evans very much is. And I was surprised by that when I saw the movie. But I was glad to see it because, yeah, I mean, it's like Cap's kind of like always the leader of the Avengers, regardless of who's actually the chairman of the team at the time. You know, it's kind of hard to be like, oh, Wasp is in charge this month. It's like, yeah, sure she is. Captain America's standing right here, you know? So it's good that the movies kind of followed that suit, where that it wasn't even disputed who like the leader would be. And right from the get-go, it's kind of, it appears to be Cap, and it's everyone kind of defers to him in one way or another throughout the movie. And I think that's the right tone to set. You know, there was a lot of mistakes they could have made early on that would have really tanked this whole enterprise. And it's just like they got really lucky, kind of like boom, boom, boom. Everything lined up perfectly for them to kind of be able to pull this off, because this isn't like a guaranteed thing. You know, DC saw the roadmap and still couldn't do it, you know? So it's kind of incredible that it worked out. And I remember seeing the movie and being like, wow, they really pulled it off. Like they had everybody together. It really worked. And then when flash forward 10 years when they did Infinity War, being like, wow, okay, they pulled it off again. This huge thing that was originally 5 movies is now 20 movies. And look, I had the same feeling a decade later sitting in theaters with even more hype built for something and being like, oh yeah, like these guys, they did it again. You know, it's like this was the first one though. This was the first like big movie. And it was the first one where you're like, holy shit, these guys, like, they really did it. Like, I remember being, like, blown away that they did it. I couldn't believe they pulled it off, because it wasn't, like, a guaranteed thing.
When we look back on these movies, though, I mean, you would say there's things that happen that you would think, oh, that was so obvious. It's so obvious that they would do things the way they did. It made perfect sense. Again, I look at the Avengers plot and the structure of it, and it's really very simplistic. Set this character up, then this character, then this character, take them here, take them there, and everything, all the pieces as they're getting moved around just made sense. Mind you, this is for the first Avengers movie, so it didn't have, I would say the stakes were high, but certainly not as high as they will be later on. And then, of course, there's the big the post-credit scene with Thanos, who I'm ashamed to say I thought was a Skrull when I saw him the first time. And I was like, no, wait a minute. He has the Skrull chin. Oh, no, but Skrulls are green. They're not purple. Duh. What about you, Dave?
I thought the movie did a really nice job of balancing all of the members of the Avengers and, giving them plenty of screen time. And I think it also helped that, unlike what DC did, what Warner Brothers did, you built up all these characters in a satisfying way. You had 2 Iron Man films. You had a Captain America movie, a Hulk movie, a Thor. You had Nick Fury making recurring appearances. You had introduced Scarlett Johansson's character, Black Widow. And I was like, yeah, so when you finally see them all together in this movie, it feels earned. It feels like this is significant because you had built this up over the course of 4 or 5 years, and now seeing them together all at one time is a big deal. And I just, I don't want necessarily to turn this into a DCEU bash fest, but I look at what Marvel did with the Avengers, and it's just mind-boggling that DC could not. The template was there. It's like we showed you this is how to do things, but I think they were playing catch up because of the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy kind of being its own thing, and Christopher Nolan insisting that my Batman can't exist in that universe of gods and goddesses and aliens and things like that. So when they do get around to DC doing their own version of what Marvel was doing, they were kind of behind the curve a little bit because Marvel, by the time DC is trying to get their cinematic universe started, Marvel's already closing out its first phase. So then you have DC trying to play, catch up and do this rush job of, we're going to do Superman and then we're going to do Wonder Woman and Batman, and then you're going to have the rest of the team all together, Flash and Cyborg and Aquaman, and you're going to care about those guys. But nobody really cared about them because, they none of those characters were given any justice, no pun intended, in the way that Marvel did. Like the characters all had their own movies, and it helped that they were all, for the most part, good movies. And then when it finally came to bring them together, it was meaningful. But DC just tried to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what stuck. And, we all know how that turned out.
Yeah, DC got so desperate in Justice League that they grabbed Joss Whedon halfway through to try to get him to make it, and it broke both the DC universe and Joss Whedon.
Yeah, exactly.
You're right. I think Dave and Elliott, what you're both saying is they made it look so simple that you're amazed no one could do it. And everyone tried to do it. I mean, Universal Monsters tried to do it and failed right out of the gate. King Kong and Godzilla were going to build this whole big monster universe. And those movies are still going, but they're not nearly at the level.
And the thing that really shocks me about it is, I would say prior to the success of the MCU, the thing that DC / Warner Brothers really had going for it is their characters were probably, at least the members of the Justice League, were probably more well-known than the majority of the MCU characters. I mean, Batman's probably the biggest comic book hero on the planet. Superman, Wonder Woman. We talked about it when we did Iron Man. Iron Man, prior to the success of the MCU films, wasn't like an A-list Marvel character, and they decided to launch this whole thing with him, which was a gamble, which is something we talked about, and it worked out really well. But who would you say is maybe the most successful or recognized character of the Avengers prior to the MCU, for just not comic book readers, but just the general audience? The Hulk, maybe even more so than
eventually we're going to get Spider-Man, and no one's as popular.
Yeah, but I'm talking about just like the Phase 1.
Probably Hulk.
Yeah, so it absolutely made no sense that DC couldn't have as much, if not bigger, success, because they had that built-in sort of brand and name recognition with the big three of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. And then, you bring in Flash and all those other guys, and they still couldn't get it right, even though Marvel was basically giving them the formula for success.
Not only did they have all these A-lists, everyone on the Justice League, everyone knows the Big Seven, right? It's like nobody doesn't know who any of those characters are. The other thing is that Warner Brothers owned the rights to all their characters.
Yeah.
Marvel grabbed the Avengers because they didn't have the rights to any of their A-list guys. The Avengers were not A-list prior to this movie. So
And Disney's not involved. I forgot until I was watching it today. I was like,
Paramount.
oh, yeah, the Paramount Mountains on this film.
Yeah.
This is what made Disney buy Marvel.
Yeah.
And another thing you can tell with again, not to make this a bash the DCEU, but when they first started promoting the Justice League film at San Diego Comic-Con, they had the slogan "Unite the Seven." They kept saying "Unite the Seven." 7 heroes don't show up in the Justice League movie; ends up being just 6.
They did their best.
Yeah, this is like No Way Home having a Sinister 5.
Yes, I was about to say that. I was like watching No Way Home, counting the villains. Like they're this close to the Sinister Six, but one short.
In fact, I was just watching No Way Home with my younger son, who says this is the greatest movie ever made. So he will have to fight you, Steven. But we were talking about the Sinister Six, and I was like, well, Venom's in the end, so he's the 6th one. And then my son Sebastian's like, yeah, Mysterio's in the beginning. I was like, oh my God, there's 7 villains in this.
To speak to back to the Avengers, I think another thing that had to be handled there were, again, the personalities. We've talked about this in previous episodes, especially when we talked about the Hulk, that by the time Marvel's Avengers rolls around, Bruce Banner will be recast. Ed Norton's going to be gone. Mark Ruffalo is brought in to fill the role, does it quite well.
I think he steals the movie.
Yeah.
He really, for some reason today, he really popped.
Yeah, his because I've seen Ragnarok a lot more recently and the other Avengers movies with him, and it's surprising how much of like a Hulk origin movie this is, where you see a lot of the Hulk in this. They don't really do the origin per se, but there's a lot of time spent like who the Hulk is and him getting a chance to kind of develop Banner as a character. And it's actually probably my favorite Banner we've seen, because he's got a lot of great lines in the movie and a lot of just ways of like handling the character and the choices he makes that's different than what Ed Norton did. And then they kind of leaned into the comedy with the Hulk later. So he lost some of like it's like Black Widow's terrified to be in the same room with him when they do the introduction in the beginning of the movie. So it's like establishing that and kind of going forward and showing like she's traumatized later when he turns into the Hulk. I mean, and that's probably, for me at least, that's the best Hulk transformation we've ever had in a movie, was when he first transformed into the Hulk. You'd been kind of waiting for it to happen. And then when it happens and it's this like crazy loud sound, like it was just like the hairs on my neck were standing up, because I was just like, hearing that again, you're just like, whoa. And it was something I didn't realize until we went back to the events of the Avengers in Endgame, when they do the time travel. We go back to the Battle of New York and they show that scene where the camera rotates around the Avengers and the Hulk lets out that scream again. And it was like the exact same like goosebumps I got from watching Avengers in theaters 10 years ago, seeing it again and being like, going back to that scene was like iconic, because that was such a huge scene when it happened, and we can get to that like later. But when they went back to it, it was like a big deal. It's like, I mean, it's kind of weird because it's like, you know, you don't want to compare it to everything else that was going on at the time, but it was like the first big superhero movie that had a battle in New York. And for me, it's like with the Marvel superheroes in particular, New York is a character in the Marvel universe. And for so long, especially with the MCU movies, like the New York was absent. It wasn't in Hulk. It was very briefly in like the Incredible Hulk at the end, and like Captain America's just at the end. Iron Man is in California. Hulk is in New Mexico. So when they get to New York and you see the city and you see the biggest superhero battle we've ever seen in New York City, it was just kind of like, whoa. It's like, it's the first time a movie felt like a comic book for me. It's like everything's been pretty close. Everything was a touch here, a point here, a visual here. But this was like the first movie where I was like, this feels like an actual comic book. And the Hulk in particular, I think they just did a great job of like giving him room to breathe and kind of like establishing him. And I think absolutely what John said is I feel like he stole the show. He just like Mark Ruffalo knocked it out of the park. He didn't handle it any way I thought he would. And it's kind of hard to picture anybody else like really taking on that role.
Yeah, and he's staying in it. I mean, he's going to be in the Disney Plus She-Hulk.
Yeah.
There are no plans to make another Hulk film because for some Universal still has some of the rights from Ang Lee. So they just keep putting Mark Ruffalo in everybody else's films or shows. And he's just continuing to pop. He just seems like he's a guy. We talk a lot about how the actors age out, how like Robert Downey Jr., when he left, it was like, yeah, he's the right age to lead. That makes sense. Mark Ruffalo is kind of the same age as Robert Downey Jr. He's just getting grayer and grayer and grayer, but it's like shows no signs of slowing down.
It's funny. I was just watching the Michael Mann film Collateral. Everyone knows it for having Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx as the two leads, but Mark Ruffalo's in it. Mark Ruffalo plays an LA detective with slicked back hair and a goatee. I was going, wait a minute. Oh, that's right. This was back when Mark Ruffalo was a serious actor, you know, but he could do everything. I put him up there with Clarke Gregg, who can do serious drama and comedy, no problem. He can turn on a dime in each one. And when you look at in the Avengers, the Hulk gets some of the great, you know, action moments, but also some of the funniest moments. The little bit for folks who have not seen it, and if you are one of those people who have, for some reason, not seen the Avengers, I won't spoil for you the laugh out loud conclusion to the fight between Thor and the Hulk on the helicarrier, which comes out of nowhere. And I remember when I saw it in the theater, everyone in the theater just cracked up laughing. It came out of nowhere. And you wouldn't think after this big, intense brawl between the Hulk and Thor that they could drop a moment of comedy in there like they did. And it worked. It worked perfectly.
Yeah, and I think that's Joss Whedon because you see that all throughout. As Steven, you said you hadn't watched much of Whedon, but if you watch Buffy, if you watch Angel, if you watch Firefly, even Dollhouse, he constantly undercuts heavy moments. He tends to make his villains as evil and dark as possible, and that's what the Chitauri are. They're one-dimensional. There's not a lot of sides to them. Even I don't think we get a scarier Loki than we get in this movie. Because
that's actually another thing I was surprised at.
And as the Thor movies go on, he becomes more of an anti-hero, and now he's the hero of his own show. But he's just murdering people in this.
Yeah, I mean, it's the evilest Loki I think we've seen. I think Tom Hiddleston kind of became bigger than Loki, so a lot like Robert Downey Jr. became bigger than Iron Man. It's like they write Loki in the comics now like Tom Hiddleston. They even draw him like Tom Hiddleston. Loki was like a hideous, ugly old man in the comics. You look at those old like Buscema drawings and stuff, and it's like it's not the same character anymore. And I think that's completely goes to Tom Hiddleston. And I think when this movie came out, oh, sorry, I thought somebody was going. I think when this movie came out, he's playing him really evil. He's murdering people, steals a guy's eyeball, like totally being a D-bag. And then I remember reading all this stuff after the movie came out where they were saying people were like sympathetic towards Loki because they were like, well, if you watch his performance, he's clearly terrified of Thanos, who's put him up to this mission to go to Earth and get the Cosmic Cube or the Tesseract or whatever they're calling it. And it's like, that's a different read of the character than I think what was intended. Was he's supposed to be this like psychopath, fascist.
You're accidentally muting yourself there, Steven. We heard fascist and that was it. You're still gone. I'm sorry, he's still gone. Something's going on with your sound.
Oh, I thought I was. Oh, I think I might be having a connection issue.
That's fine. To the point of how we're accustomed to seeing him in comics. For those who've never seen Loki in the comics, that was Richard Grant as the alternate, in the Loki series. And I'm sorry, I still haven't gotten over the fact that yes, Loki was responsible for the death of thousands of people in New York City, and yet later on we're supposed to say he's like a big hero, you know.
Yeah, but Will Smith just slapped Chris Rock in the face, and people still stood up for his Oscar.
There we go. There is the moment, folks. Where we are going to set the timeline of this particular broadcast within the history of pop culture. Now we are recording this. If you listen to this particular broadcast on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network, we will have been. It's the day after Will Smith, unable to take a joke or whatever, and has to slap a guy for joking about his wife. I say the moment you got to slap a comedian, you've already admitted you can't be funnier than him. You can't.
Yeah, because he's Chris Rock.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard to be funnier than Chris Rock. It's very hard to roast Chris Rock worse than he can roast you. And then later on say that God calls you to defend your family, and the devil made you do it. So wait, who was it? Will, did God tell you to do it, or did the devil make you do it? I don't know. So make up your mind. Pick a side.
I'm just impressed that we got a G.I. Jane reference in 2022.
I know. See, that was it. It was like low. It's like how many people didn't even get the joke?
It was a cotton ball.
Yes,
lobbed over.
See, and he could have easily come back and said, "Oh, dude, really? That was 20 years ago, or something." But no, he had to go up.
He could have laughed it off. He did laugh it off, and then Jada Pinkett made a face, and then all of a sudden he came up.
Then he turned into the Hulk. At that point, he hulked out. He went up there, and he gave him an open-handed pop. You know,
as my father used to say, he was unmanned.
And after that, Chris is like didn't even like put a hand up to defend himself. He stood there. It was like
it was going to happen, and he tried to play it off. He was like, "Holy shit, Will Smith smacked me in the face." But what really creeped me out, and I don't mean to derail this podcast, but this is all anyone's talking about. What creeped me out about that moment was like Will Smith went back and then just started cursing at him, and the whole place went dead. And it's like, dude, you're a movie star. You know you destroyed the entire atmosphere of this place.
You know what kills me too is that when Chris Rock made that joke, everyone in the audience laughed. You heard everyone laugh at the joke, and then Will Smith goes up, and everyone's laughing. Ooh, this is gonna happen, and then boom. I'm like, so folks, either if it was so bad, if that joke that Chris Rock made was so bad, why'd y'all laugh at it? So anyway, but again, if you're
this is all my fault. Dave, save us.
Dave, get us back on the Avengers.
Dave, you've been our everyman now. Is Avengers one you've already seen?
Oh yeah, I saw this in theaters. I've probably seen it. I don't know, a half dozen or so times since it came out.
Now that you've started from the beginning of the MCU and you've gotten up to this, did it change your perspective on it at all? Like seeing everything the characters had done building up to it.
I don't know if it changes my perspective. Obviously, knowing some of their characters, their fates, and what will eventually happen to them, it makes certain scenes or lines of dialogue maybe ring a little bit differently than they might have back in 2012. I still think that this is, every time a new MCU movie comes out, there are all these, pop culture websites. They do a new ranking of them, and there have been so many really great, like big epic ones over the last just couple years. The Infinity War, Endgame, and No Way Home. But I think this one is it's pretty high up there. I mean, I don't know, of the 4 Avengers films, I kind of like Age of Ultron, but it's pretty high up there. I don't know. It's hard to compare just because of the expectation and the scope of everything to Endgame and Infinity War. But I keep going back to that idea of that earned sort of payoff of all those characters, of gradually building them up and familiarizing the audience with them, making the audience care about them, and then seeing them all together for the first time. And this felt like, a satisfying payoff to that. And that's just, this is 10 years ago. So that's just the end of the first phase. And then we would get all these other big, cappers to each phase over the years since. But yeah, I still think that the trailer may have aged poorly, but I think this movie has aged well. I still think it's one of the better MCU movies, and it's kind of every time they do one of these big movies that's the capper of each successive phase, I think they're all kind of judged against this one because this was that first big event movie. Like you guys were saying, it's the first real MCU movie where everyone's together for the first time. I'm still 10 years later a really big fan of this one.
If there's a weak spot in this film, I mean, it's the Hawkeye arc. I mean, they're Joss Whedon wasn't quite sure what to do with him. I mean, even Jeremy Renner himself will say that his character doesn't really get a lot of development. It wouldn't be until the Hawkeye series on Disney Plus where you would get the most character development out of Clint Martin. And of course, Whedon has to put in the bit that Hawkeye is mind controlled, which would be kind of a thing that would happen to Clint early on in his career, in the classic Avengers comics. But beyond that, it's like, he's there to kind of like move things around. Just, my guess is Whedon said, okay, I got to do something with him. So I'm going to make him a bad guy, but he's mind controlled by Loki. And then he'll have a motivation at the end to want to get Loki when we finally break him out. So that's about, even on the review, that was my thing. And another thing, I will say that CGI holds up really well. The special effects still hold up really well for as long ago as that film is. I mean, far and away better than, I would say, the Hulk movie, better than the Thor movie. It just wow. It was really heck, it's even better. And folks still love the first Jurassic Park, but you don't see as much digital matting in this film, or you don't see any digital matting in this film like you will like in the original Jurassic Park. Mind you, this movie does come out much later than the first Jurassic Park, but still one of those real breakthroughs in special effects.
Yeah. One of the things we keep coming back to is that balancing of the characters. You're right. I think Hawkeye gets the short shrift, but you're not just balancing the 6 characters. You're balancing Nick Fury. You're balancing Maria Hill. You're balancing Agent Coulson. You have a good 10 characters in this to balance, a lot of which the audience has never seen. So somebody's going to get the short shrift. And I think you're right. Whedon clearly chose Agent Coulson over Clint Barton. And why, we don't know. But what fascinates me about this is that we keep talking about it's so perfectly done. It's so clean. It's what everybody should do. Whedon went through draft after draft after draft of this. Marvel was constantly giving him characters and taking characters away because they didn't know who they had. Ant-Man and the Wasp were supposed to be central characters in this. The Wasp, Whedon himself said there was a draft where the Wasp was the main character and everyone else revolved around her. And then Marvel said, you know what, Edgar Wright's not ready, take him out. So the story just kept changing and changing and changing. But for some reason, probably to his credit, it must have gotten simpler and tighter and cleaner and simpler and tighter. And who knows what that first draft might have looked like. That it might have been Justice League.
We all know one thing, though. One of those characters is going to die because Joss Whedon kills someone in every one of his shows or whatever. Someone's going to die. So when it was Agent Coulson, I was like, oh, man,
He not only does someone die, but he always picks the guy you like the most.
The one you like. If you ever watch anything with Joss Whedon in it, don't get too attached to those characters because he will kill the one you like the most. Yes.
But if you watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., you know he's not really dead.
Well, that will be later, of course. Right.
Yeah,
that is true. That will be
the
later. But
the loophole with that is once they found out Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. wasn't a massive hit, they never let Clarke Gregg back in. The next time we will see him in a movie will be Captain Marvel because it takes place before Avengers.
Yeah.
So they spent a whole season bringing him back to life. And then when it came to showing S.H.I.E.L.D. again, they were like, what are we going to explain a whole season of a TV series? And he just gets left behind.
Yeah.
But you talk about all those drafts, and I remember leading up to this, reading about how Whedon said he needed a moment, he needed something to happen, like some sort of dramatic event had to happen to really bring the characters together. So he said, with all his drafts, it just wasn't working. It didn't seem like things were happening, and a big part of it was bringing Iron Man in, getting him to buy into the whole thing. So he knew it had to be, someone that Iron Man knew, someone that I guess Iron Man would care about because, Clarke Gregg and Agent Coulson would be introduced in Iron Man 1. And he goes, okay, well, if someone's going to be the sacrificial lamb, it's going to be Agent Coulson.
And it's going to be a character that Marvel doesn't publish.
Well,
Agent
not
Coulson
then,
created,
but they do now.
They do now, but he was created like Clarke Gregg was hired to be a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. They gave him the name Agent Coulson. We will see S.H.I.E.L.D. agents that have come from the comics, but Coulson was a creation of the movie. So he was the easiest one to go. And you're right. He became so popular that they started using him in the comics and the Spider-Man animated series at the time, Ultimate Spider-Man.
And they will also make Nick Fury black because in the comics he was white, but then they changed it over. But mind you, in the I'm sorry, I take that back. In the main 616 universe, Nick Fury is an old white guy who fought in World War II. Didn't
the design of Nick Fury as a bald black man, didn't that predate Samuel Jackson's casting though?
Yes, because they did that in the Ultimates. Mark Miller would make Nick Fury a black man in the Ultimates, and there's even one scene in the comics where the Ultimates are sitting around a table talking about who would play them in the movie, and Nick Fury says Samuel L. Jackson, of course. So you can tell they were intending on that.
Yeah, and Mark Millar said who would be the coolest guy in the world, Samuel L. Jackson. So they based it on him, and knowing that Samuel L. Jackson is a huge comic fan, and a huge sci-fi fan, which is why he was Mace Windu in the prequels. He's a true geek. So they kind of knew that he wouldn't put a stop to it. And then it became like a Patrick Stewart Professor X thing. When it came to cast him, it's like, well, we already got the right guy as long as he says okay. And, he's thrilled to do it. And apparently the Secret Invasion show on Disney Plus is going to be all Samuel L. Jackson.
Cool. I kind of wish, not total sidetrack, I kind of wish Mace Windu had been Morgan Freeman, though. I watched the prequels, and whenever Mace Windu opens his mouth, I just hear and see Samuel L. Jackson. I mean, that's with a lot of movies, but he kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in those movies.
Yeah, and I think I believe, and Elliott, you're a better Star Wars expert than I am. I believe he was added when Samuel L. Jackson said he wanted to be in it, and he just took half of Yoda's lines. So there was no Mace Windu before Samuel L. Jackson said, "Put me in Star Wars."
No, you're absolutely right. He was lobbying hard in the media to be in Star Wars. His joke was, I'll even play somebody. I think he said, "I'll play Obi-Wan's slave" or something like that to be in a Star Wars movie, And of course, he appears in The Phantom Menace, playing a Jedi Master Mace Windu, and then it's his appearance there, and then after he finally gets into Star Wars, he goes, "Man, I want a lightsaber,
purple one.
Give me a lightsaber. I want to be able to have a lightsaber." And then of course, boom, Attack of the Clones. He not only has a lightsaber, but he has a purple lightsaber.
There's a beautiful moment on the DVD where he's like, where it's like Samuel Jackson and his people pull George Lucas and a couple of people in. And Samuel Jackson's like, what colors are lightsabers? And George Lucas was like, oh, well, they're red and they're blue and they're green. What about purple? And he was like, purple. It's like George Lucas is like Lorne Michaels with low self-esteem. He's like, oh.
And then he had to come up with a whole story as to why Mace Windu's lightsaber is purple. And did this whole thing about the trading of lightsabers and whatever. So, but that's the way, they say with George Lucas has said, whenever you put something in a story, make it appear as if you were planning that all along. Yeah.
And to get back to this is probably the most Samuel L. Jackson we get in the MCU. And pretty much every other appearance is a glorified cameo. We'll get a good amount of Winter Soldier, but not as much.
Oh, Captain Marvel's got a big part.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Although he's so weirdly de-aged. I forget.
And Captain Marvel, I'm sorry. The bit with we will get to this movie, but it undercuts one of the best lines that Nick Fury had in this, had previously. He goes, "The last time I trusted somebody, I lost an eye." And I'm like, then we find out how Nick Fury actually does lose an eye. And you're like, really? Oh. But, yeah.
Sometimes less is more. And
Exactly.
That's one of those things where it's like, I would have really loved not to ever have an explanation we didn't need it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's an intriguing plot point that they just didn't have to touch on. And they did. And you're just like, well, why'd you guys go and fucking do that? You could have not.
It's like Budapest, which is a very Whedon-y throwaway line, and it becomes half of Black Widow.
Yeah.
I would like to give a shout out to Susan and Lehman who are watching us on the Facebook live stream. Thank you for joining us as you do each and every night. Polar Nights, thanks for watching us on the Twitch channel and giving a shout out. Love this show. It's every stage of beard growth. We appreciate that. I accidentally shaved a little too much of mine. It's slowly coming back. So I can't tell if Steven, if you and I are.
Yeah, you probably got more. I shaved recently, so
yeah.
Mine comes in so white now that with the ring light, I just
yeah.
I just look like I had acne as a teen. It's too textured.
You look distinguished.
Yeah.
And Steven, I am going to ask yet again before the next time you come on to please shave down to a pencil thin mustache so that you can look like young Howard Stark.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll look so much like young Howard Stark as I will a pedophile. So that's like not a good look for me. I've tried it before. It doesn't look so great.
Doesn't work? Yeah, okay.
No.
I actually once
happen.
I tried doing the Wolverine mutton chops a while back. And no. I don't have the face for it.
I did a pencil mustache for a sketch we put on YouTube, which you can see now. But by the end of that, it was still ready to go. Dave, how long have you had the mustache? You have the classic 70s
Yeah,
mustache.
it's a classic stash.
Yeah. It's a COVID stash.
Yeah, there you go.
Really?
I was growing it during the when the mask mandate started, especially at work, as Elliott can attest to. People didn't have to see the weird, awkward, wispy stage between when I decided to start growing it and when it like matured.
So like that season 1 Breaking Bad mustache.
Yeah. So then one of my boss one day, she like saw me. I had it for a while, and I just like had it off casually at my desk, and she like stopped in her tracks, and it was like her jaw dropped. I was like, "You're like one of the last people to find out, apparently."
You didn't, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't you also have a bit of a beard for a while there too?
I was trying, but I can't grow in like a beard, like, that it's like patchy. Like I'll get it in the spots it's supposed to be, but it doesn't grow in like full. So I don't, I've given up on that.
I think I remember you having it. Looked okay to me. You probably can't do like the whole, like again, like I can do a grizzly. I'm friggin', if I don't shave any of this again.
You're gonna look like Sasquatch.
Yes. There was a time when I was doing the Chicago Blackhawks beard off, where myself and another writer from Red Eye were growing our beards. versus two of the Blackhawks who were growing their beards for the playoffs, and we would have pictures taken of us for every day in the red eye, and we were told we can't shave, can't groom it, can't trim it, just got to let it grow. And the year that they won the 2 years, there was a year they won the Stanley Cup. I mean, this thing, I looked like freaking Osama bin Laden. I mean, and at one point I had to go on a trip. I had to get on a plane, and I got pulled out of line. I was that guy who got pulled out of line for this extra security check. And I go, we all know why you're pulling me out of line. I'm a dark-skinned guy with a big, thick beard. We know. We all know. And then,
Elliot, it didn't help that you were carrying that dynamite in your hand, too.
It was a prop. It was a prop.
It was actually a big red cylinder with a
Yeah.
and it had
With a clock on it.
written on it.
Yeah.
You're also tiptoeing.
And I mean, I was gonna do a stand-up set that night, and I just happened to say, I sure hope I don't bomb tonight. So.
And then you rehearsed that on the plane. That was the.
Well, at one point, I got up in front of everybody on the plane because we were getting delayed and taking off, and I wanted to entertain everyone. That is also another reference to something that happened in me. Nobody's talking about the lady who stood up in front of a crowd at the Burbank 13 because the movie, I say, was the Lost City, starring Sandra Bullock and what's his face?
Channing Tatum.
Channing Tatum. Was delayed, so this woman decides to get up and start doing her stand-up set in front of.
Oh, I didn't hear this.
Yeah, and then she went viral. She went, not for being funny,
Yeah.
So luckily for her, Will Smith, bumped her, after that.
I heard Robert De Niro got a late night talk show just to show that stand-up set.
So speaking of challenging performances, I got to go back to Robert Downey Jr. And you guys are talking about, yes, he is a real star in this movie. One of the bits that a lot of folks, correct me if I'm wrong, I do believe that line that he does on the helicarrier was, that guy's playing Galaga. That was an improv on his point, complete improv. That let's keep that in. We're going to keep that in, and then we got to film this scene with a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent actually playing Galaga on his console. That's what Joss Whedon had to deal with on the set of The Avengers.
And Joss Whedon is not Judd Apatow. He's not going to be like, let's do one for fun.
No.
Like, he wrote that script, and he wants to hear that script. And as we've learned later, he needs to hear that script. Gal Gadot.
Well, he said, I've read in interviews with him where he said, because he doesn't call out Downey directly, but he would say that he knew there were times when he goes, there's some of the performers that needed choices. So he would write like 3 or 4 different lines for a character for Downey, and let's be honest, it had to be Downey in a scene and he gave him those choices. So it's kind of like, when you're in preschool and you have the one kid who doesn't want to take his nap. So you go, look, I'm going to give you a choice right now. Mind you, ultimately, all those choices are going to end up with you taking that nap. In this case, it's ultimately all these choices are going to end up you giving me a line that helps move this scene forward, as opposed to you deconstructing everything and trying to get all your scene mates in on the improv session with you.
I'm actually kind of curious because Edward Norton couldn't play ball, so they replaced him. And so, there must be some line Robert Downey Jr. was able to walk where he could still do the role, do the movie, be brought in for sequels, like the whole bit all the way through, no cast replacement, nothing. But then Edward Norton, he was too problematic, to keep around, I guess.
From what I heard about Edward Norton, he fought in the editing room. He showed up in the editing room and wanted to rewrite it. So I think Downey focuses on his performance
and then bounces.
But once he's off set, you guys can do it. And also people went to Iron Man and they didn't go to Hulk, and they came out the same summer.
Yeah, it's true.
That goes for a lot. That's why There are some people that can slap Chris Rock and some people that can't. And yes, I ruined the podcast again.
Again. Well, to the point too, even Downey himself admits that he was being a bit of a handful in the beginning, and that over time, as the movies progressed, he'd be like, okay, cool. No, I'm going to do what I'm asked, because he'll come back for Civil War and really give an incredible performance. I'm telling you, probably his best Iron Man performance out of all the films.
In what is legitimately not his film. That the full title of that movie is Captain America.
He's playing the villain in the movie.
Yeah.
Kind of, but he has a great arc in this film. He has a great story arc, and he plays it because he's got to be the foil to Cap. You know, they've been friends, now they're foil. Yep, there we go.
This is
and he does it incredibly well. And then you get to Infinity War and Endgame, where he's going to have a lot on him to carry that story forward. But by this point, he can just show up in his sweatpants and just, let them CGI everything around them. That I will say, talking about the CGI, there's some CGI bits in Infinity War that I rewatched. I'm like, man, that does not hold up as well as the stuff I saw in the first Avengers movie. There's a point when you can tell it's a CGI helmet on different characters, or their heads are put on a CGI construct.
Well, that's also at the point where all the helmets magically just like decompose whenever you want to show the actor's face. Like every one of them, Spider-Man, it just.
Yeah, we got to a point with Iron Man specifically where it got kind of ridiculous how the suit comes on him, and this might be like the last movie that was like somewhat believable or sensible before it was just like liquid metal crawling up his arm.
As an aside, am I the only person who's kind of like, I mean, I know why they do this, but I've seen all the billboards for No Way Home now, because they're promoting the video, the streaming and the Blu-ray that's coming out, and you see all their faces. You see everybody in the cutoff Spider-Man, unitard. I'm like, what Spider-Man's got that's like the most recognized, most trademarked, most recognizable icon in comics. I think you have Spider-Man and Mickey Mouse. Those are the two biggies. That image alone, the eyes with the webs, and now you don't even see it on the posters. It kind of annoys me.
Can you imagine how many agents and managers showed up into pre-production going like, well, maybe this Spider-Man costume shows Toby's face.
Yeah.
There's always a moment in Spider-Man movies where like they have to pull it off. And it's like in the first one, it's shredded, and in the end, and then I think in Spider-Man 2, he gets like a mote in his eye, and he's like,
on a train full of people. It's like, it's like the one thing with the movies that really is always kind of dumb. I didn't realize it, and then when it got pointed out to me, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a really dumb thing that like lawyers argue about. Is we got to show the guy's face as much as possible, or else how are they going to know it's Robert Downey Jr. flying around? And they're like, trust me, we know. It's like, we're not going to forget who the guy was that put the mask on 10 seconds ago, And this idea of like every movie they have to either unmask themselves, or the mask gets destroyed, or they take their mask off, or it disintegrates. It's like, it gets kind of dumb.
And a lot of it is the actors that have been working out for 9 months and not eating carbs and, and just running between sets. And they're like, I've got myself in this crazy shape, so you do one shot with my shirt off. No, you're going to see me run around and punch people and jump over things.
Again, in the movies, it made sense in the movies. I'm just talking about in the ads. They do for the ads. Like, they kind of.
What's like the straight up just spoilers for a movie poster with all 3 Spider-Mans unmasked on the movie poster? There's a billboard on 55 in Chicago, and it's like going right into the city, and it's like, why are you putting the biggest spoiler for this movie on the fucking movie poster?
Well, I'm grateful they waited for it to stream, because they did not do that in the theaters.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of all knew it was coming, but it's like they have like Doc Ock on the movie poster, and you're like, why? It would have been 100 times cooler to see that, not knowing he was going to show up and then you see
What's
the
about
arm.
for marketing? Like,
Yeah.
Can you imagine being like in the internal Sony marketing department and they're like, "We've got the biggest Spider-Man movie ever. You can't show any of
it." But do you really need
show
to?
Tom Holland in a mask.
Can't you just say you're coming out with a Spider-Man movie, give the date, and just wait for people to show up? Who's not gonna go see Spider-Man?
You know what? I'll argue with that because No Way Home is now like the third biggest moneymaker ever.
Yeah.
Far From Home wasn't.
Well,
but I think too, because No Way Home, there was anticipation for it, mind you, like post-COVID and all that. But okay, let's reframe it just for a moment. I mean, I think Spider-Man has the brand recognition now, and enough people are like, we want to see these movies. I was saying what DC needs to do one day is just announce Avengers, the date. That's it. That's all you get. No posters, no trailers, no teasers, no nothing. You keep it up. And then I'm telling you, that's all they need to do. Just tell me what the movie is. And
I agree up until even tell me what the movie is. Just say next Marvel movie. Here's the date. I'll go see it. I don't care what it is.
I liked until the fact that you said DC's going to put out Avengers because now I have to know what.
My brain farted the show. Because I said they ought to do like Beyonce. Just say, oh, we've got an Avengers movie. It's live on Disney Plus now. Don't even announce it. Just suddenly it's there. Like when Beyonce dropped that one album out of nowhere, Untitled, and people went nuts. And the thing went, the people bought it. It went through the roof, and she didn't have to invest anything in promotion because she's got that much recognition. You can do that. Marvel can do that with the Avengers. They can do that with the next Avengers movie. And then the moment they say, oh, it's on Disney Plus, that's the only way you can see it. The number of people who are going to just suddenly, boom, sign up for it. They're going to go nuts. Because, oh, wait, where is it? It's not the theater. It's Disney Plus. What? And I think, they could do the same thing with the next Star Wars movie. Just, boom, there it is. We've got it. Boom. No one knew it was coming.
I don't know. And maybe it's because I'm the advertising guy.
Yeah, it's because you're the advertising guy.
But it is, what makes these movies $1 billion. Marvel used to have two levels of movies before the pandemic. They would have movies that made 500 million and they'd have movies that made $1 billion. And like Ant-Man made 500 million and Avengers made $1 billion. And in between those two, that $500 million is people that don't care to see every Marvel movie.
Right.
So that's the people they're talking to. They're not talking to us. They're only talking to us so we get excited and go on Twitter and Instagram and go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, because we're doing their marketing budget for them.
Yes, but again,
what they're trying to do is get people who are like, oh, I saw Iron Man. That was pretty good. I saw Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire. Is this one good? Okay, I'll go. That's who they're trying to rope in.
That's a valid point. And I will say, I think with the Marvel movies, it's become, I say Marvel movies right now are like this. I've said this before. They're like the Super Bowl. They get people who aren't necessarily comic book movie fans to go see them because everyone wants to see what everyone else is talking about, what they're talking about. And No Way Home. That happened with No Way Home. It's like suddenly, oh my God, this is the greatest Spider-Man movie ever. Mind you, it's a really good Spider-Man movie. I mean, it's a really.
But you know what? Right before Spider-Man was Eternals. And just because something's Marvel doesn't mean everybody's going to go and get excited. First of all, the movie's got to be really good.
Yeah, it's got to be good, first of all. Eternals is not that.
To capture something. You know what? Shang-Chi is really good, and people didn't go crazy about it like they did Spider-Man.
Yeah, no, okay. Thank you, because you guys are making good points there. And I would just say they can do that. My crazy idea here is they can release the next Avengers movie with very little fanfare and it's going to do well. They can release the next Spider-Man movie without a hell of a lot of fanfare and it's going to do well. I'm going to tell you right now, they can release the next X-Men movie within the MCU. That movie is going to make bank because people are going to be like, I need to see this. I need to see what Disney does with the X-Men.
Yeah, but I will say for all three of those movies, Avengers, Spider-Man, and X-Men, which, yes, are the most popular in Marvel. All of those movies have come to an end point where they need to be rebooted. So they are going to make a point of saying, this person's in this character's in this actor's in this. That's where we heard about No Way Home. We didn't know why characters were in it, but it was like Jamie Foxx is in it and Alfred Molina's in it. And there is going to be some convincing. And especially if something ended on a down note. You know, did all three of you guys see Dark Phoenix?
No, I never saw it.
I saw it and I don't remember it. But it's, you know what? When Batman Begins came out, it didn't make a lot of money. It was number 5 for the year because Batman and Robin sucked. And even though it had been 8 years, there was enough people who said, I saw the last one and it sucked.
But again, we're talking about DC movies. I think
we're talking about Marvel movies. Stop
Marvel
doing that.
movies are a different animal. And I will say this though, when you talk about rebooting, and this is like dovetailing into Dave's and my show, Shaking That Herd. When that reboot's announced, and all they're going to need to do is announce who's playing James Bond, and that there's going to be a new movie, and that's it. That's all they need to do. You know, you're not going to need to know anymore beyond that.
You can't just say new Bond come at Christmas. Like, people have to know who replaced Daniel Craig.
I don't know. You know, now that I think about it, well, here's the thing. There's no way you're going to keep that under wraps. Someone's going to find out and someone's going to leak it. So you have to at least say, you know, boom. Which I guess now I'm undercutting my entire argument because there's no way you could produce a Marvel movie and just try to release it without, you know, stuff leaking out and people talking about it, just like happened with No Way Home.
They kept Toby and Andrew under wraps. Everybody asked them. And when I was in the theater opening night, when, you know, we're going to talk spoilers about a movie we're not going to cover for 9 months, but when Andrew Garfield does show up, there's a silhouette of him, and for a second I was like, maybe that's Venom, because I didn't know 100%, and that was part of the fun of it.
And then they're talking about Tom Cruise possibly playing a variant of Iron Man, Tony Stark, in the new Doctor Strange. So, you know.
Yeah, and we heard Patrick Stewart's voice, and that was enough to make people go nuts for about a week.
Yeah. And then Will Smith smacked Chris Rock, and then they got people stopped talking about that.
Yeah. But going back to Avengers, really that's all we knew going in. It was like, we're going to put all the characters from the other movies together. But we didn't know a lot about it. I think we knew Loki was going to be the villain in it because it was going to be a parallel to the first issue of Avengers. But there weren't a lot of spoilers going into it. And I'd be curious to hear from the three of you guys. Do you think it's because Marvel wasn't as big as it is now that not enough people cared? Or you think that there's nothing particular in this movie that happens that's a spoiler? It's all about the 6 of them getting together and fighting.
Well, I guess you could say like Thanos, I guess, would be like the closest thing they could have like spoiled, but that was such like an afterthought and not like a planned thing. I think, yeah, you're right. I think it's like the spectacle of what it was, of like the first time putting this many superheroes on screen together was enough of a draw. But then I don't know that it did huge, like immediately. Like, was opening weekend massive? I think it was one of those movies where it was like, after it came out and then everyone started talking about how good it was, then you saw the next weekend and the next weekend and the next weekend. It just kept going as this like massive juggernaut. You know, maybe it was the biggest movie that opened that week because it didn't open against anything significant. But then, you know, it's like, it was like kind of like everyone was talking about it. So I think then the people who initially weren't going to go see it because maybe they didn't like Thor, thought the second Iron Man wasn't as strong.
Well, I knew a lot of people that didn't see Thor or Captain America
that went to go see it, right?
To be Iron Man 3, and they were like, "Well, I love Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man. Here he is in this. I'm going."
Yeah.
But what's interesting about Avengers is, as we're saying, this is the first big movie, made more than any Iron Man movie up to that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the highest grossing Iron Man movie was Iron Man 3 because it followed Age of Ultron immediately. Or no, it's right after this movie, right?
Yeah, and that's going to be a full episode.
Yeah, I think it's like there's a lot of... Yeah, I don't think there was anything really to like spoil with it. I think it was more of like, hey, we're really doing it. You know, like I remember when War Machine showed up and they had the fight at the end of Iron Man 2, and I'm like, oh my God, we're going to do Avengers. Here's two guys teaming up, and it looked really good and got you kind of excited to be like, oh, what would like an actual team up be? And then you're seeing 6 superheroes like running around in like what at the time was probably like the biggest action sequence in like a superhero movie, that Battle of New York. And like it looked great. It's a long fight too. It goes on for a long time, and it was worth every moment, you know?
Yeah. And I think what's funny about it is this summer, you reminded me, Steven, that, you know, this movie came out in May, was really early, just like the Iron Man films had been, and took over the summer. This is also the year we get Dark Knight Rises, which had this huge amount of buildup because, as I mentioned before, Batman Begins did okay, but a lot of people saw it on video. And then, of course, the news around Heath Ledger dying made Dark Knight gigantic. And it was this 1-2 punch of those two movies, Iron Man 1 and Dark Knight in 2008. Everybody was waiting for Dark Knight Rises in 2012. Dark Knight Rises was not Avengers. And, you know, and we could turn this into a different podcast and argue whether it's a good movie or a bad movie. But Dark Knight Rises did well, but it was not it did not take over the pop culture in the same way that Avengers did.
Yeah, I mean, you think that's like the only other movies that did what Avengers did in terms of like scale was other Avengers movies, and then like Black Panther was just like a massive success. Like I think that made more money than maybe like Age of Ultron or one of the Avengers movies.
Yeah, I mean, I have to go back to Lord of the Rings for a franchise that built so much and did so much, but then they didn't sustain that either because the Hobbits were disappointments. And Lord of the Rings had the same thing. They had 50 years of people reading the books and loving the characters in the books and wanting to see them on the big screen. Marvel was able to tap into that, but as we said, Marvel's now done it 25 times.
The Avengers Age of Ultron, I'm trying to remember, what was the box? Oh, the box office on that was just under 500 million. Okay. So it did not equal the first Avengers. And then, then it would be Black Panther would come along and then be the next film that hits the $1 billion mark.
Didn't Guardians didn't hit 1 billion?
I don't think it hit $1 billion.
Okay. That was a major surprise. So it must have been at least 750.
Yeah, Guardians will make just under 700, just under 800 million.
Ooh, I got it right. Therefore, I should get that money.
Yeah. And then the next after that would be Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel will then be the next $1 billion one. But talk about how I this is my recollection leading up to Avengers. I remember there being shots of Chris Evans in his Captain America outfit, shooting on the set of the streets of New York. Those would leak online, and and then you would have folks, having the shots of the Avengers together, which is something that you wouldn't see for a while. But that would be about it. You wouldn't hear a lot beyond that outside of the story. And I do remember hosting a special pre-release screening of the film with a name drop, Marcus Lashak of WGN. And that was a packed theater. There were people who were really anticipating this movie. And it went over huge. So I think to that, they, maybe Marvel wasn't expecting it or thinking they were going to have that kind of a hit on their hands, but I think the mood was right for it at that time. Mind you, lightning in a bottle. I don't think you're going to be able to do that again. You can't do that on purpose. It just happens.
Right. Steven, did you guys have a screening of it? Because this was around the time your store was doing at Hollywood Boulevard.
I don't think we had done the screening for this. I do remember we had seen it with a massive group of people. So I think we had organized like, hey, we're going to see it at this theater at this time. And I remember, it was like a midnight show because we went to see it. And then it actually kind of started a tradition at the store where whether we were doing a screening for a movie or just a big group of us going out to see a movie was like, the sit and talk about the movie after you leave the theater. We'd get out of the theater. We stood in the lobby. We were probably in the lobby. I think this was the Quarry Cinema over here. And we were probably in the lobby for like almost the length of the movie. Like, I think we talked about that movie for like an hour and 40 minutes. We were just going on and on about, oh, this happened and this was great and this was cool. And then like that just became like a regular tradition for Marvel movies, was when they'd come out, as like everyone would be so jazzed after seeing it, we'd spend 40 minutes after the movie talking about the movie. And that just got to be really old very quickly, because a lot of these movies were midnight showings, and then it's 3 a.m. and you're just like, oh, I got to go to work tomorrow.
That's how we started the podcast, was after a midnight showing of The Hobbit. And that was 3 hours, and I fell asleep. And I fell asleep at the point where they all went to sleep in the mountain, because I remembered they woke up when Bilbo shouted, "Wake up!" I woke up. But I remember leaving that movie. I'm like, that's a huge movie, and everyone was too tired to talk about it. So I was like, why don't you just come over and we'll record talking about it?
Yeah.
I can't do the midnight shows anymore.
Yeah, me, same here. I'm done with that. It's a young man's game.
I started to do the Saturday matinees, and I'm like, everybody does it midnight Friday. I'll wake up early and do 10 a.m. on Saturday, and there'll be still no spoilers.
Elliot, that's why I like the 7 p.m. previews at the Pickwick. Even if the movie I'm most looking forward to seeing, the projector fizzles out at that exact moment.
You did it. You brought it upon yourself, my friend.
You
tempted the fates. You tempted the fates, and the fates said, "Ha ha, buddy." You folks, if you're wondering what we're talking about, you'll have to go back to the Shaken Not Heard page to watch the show where Dave and I talk about No Time to Die and the adventure that was going to a Thursday night screening of the film and all the things that happened after that. but Dave, when you saw the Avengers, did you go by yourself or you with somebody?
I was with a couple of my buddies. Yeah.
What was it? I was saying, what was that like?
Oh man, it was a long time ago. It was fun. I mean, I remember the crowd was really into it. Maybe not so much as No Way Home, where the cheers were drowning out every other line of dialogue of the movie, but there were a lot of moments of audience clapping and cheering. Yeah, it was fun. I think it was probably up to that point, it was probably the most fun and exciting experience seeing one of these MCU films in the theater.
There was that whole bit, like what these now the Marvel movies are. They've become this thing where you need those types of reaction videos in movie theaters. You had that in this film. You had it in Endgame. Everyone will talk about, the scene in Endgame where when Captain America catches Thor's hammer and people go berserk, and then you hear on your left, and then the portals open and everyone went nuts there too. And Cap says Avenger for the first time in all the Avengers movies, because Whedon was screwing with us. You almost heard him say Avengers Assemble. You didn't quite hear him say it. You finally get to hear him say it in Endgame, and that sent people into a frenzy. And then now you have No Way Home, and you sit there and you go, man, they keep raising the bar with these event movies. I feel bad. I do. I feel really bad for whoever had to do the next Avengers film.
I thought you were just going to say, I feel bad for whoever has to do the next film after No Way Home. And I was like, that's Morbius.
Oh, man. That's not sounding good. I've been hearing the buzz on that. Not good at all.
No, it's no blame.
It never looked good.
It's getting panned so bad. They're even saying that the post-credit scene, which is the one thing that redeems the Venom movies, even those are stupid. They say that they make no sense to them. It's like, what?
I'll defend the Venom movies as being dumb fun. Especially the second one with Andy Serkis directing, because he knows how dumb it is and he's just goofing on it. And it's like you click into that. It's like that. The first one's a weird 90s throwback, but the second one, nobody's taking it seriously. So as an audience member, you have the obligation to not take that movie seriously.
As someone who did and still enjoys Godzilla versus King Kong, I'm not going to criticize that. I just liked it for the dumb fun that it was. So yeah.
Sometimes you
Godzilla
need a
versus-
dumb fun movie.
Yeah, Godzilla versus Kong had 7 moments where my son and I went, ooh. That was
Sometimes that's all you can ask for. You know?
And it was on HBO Max. I didn't even go anywhere.
Elliott, you said the thing about how this is the Endgame was the only time the Avengers Assemble line is actually spoken. Didn't this movie have that title in other countries?
Yeah.
The very first, yes. In other countries, it's in the US we call it Marvel's The Avengers, but in other countries it's called Avengers Assemble. So
And I think especially in England, where it would be confused with the classic and the Peel series that was made into a film in the 90s with Sean Connery.
Yeah, Ralph Fiennes and Uma Thurman in the Emmett Peel role.
There's so many Bond connections right there.
And I'm looking forward to Daniel Craig finally making it to the MCU, playing and maybe, you know what? Because William Hurt is gone as Thunderbolt Ross. Maybe he can come in as another type of military guy who's got to, deal with the Avengers.
And now we have Pierce Brosnan in the DCEU. So Craig
Pierce Brosnan is Dr. Fate.
Yeah.
Which
is cool casting.
Yes.
Yeah, I dig it.
Yeah.
I saw the production artwork of that. If that's the way he looks, that's gonna be pretty badass. I am not though jazzed by the trailer, the teaser that they put out. It was like, yeah. I sure hope these are not finished effects. I sure hope they're gonna.
Yeah, but the trailer they put out, it was just like one trailer for every DC movie.
For 4 movies.
Yeah,
and they showed that before the Batman. They're like, 2022 is going to be the year of the DC. And 2 of those, since that came out, 2 of those movies have been delayed to next year. Yeah.
Well, it was like Batman was supposed to show up in 4 movies this year.
Was that?
Batman's supposed to be in like 4 movies this year because you've got the Batman with the kid from Harry Potter, the Twilight kid, and then the Lego Batman or the cartoon Batman with who's playing
Keanu is Batman.
Keanu Reeves, yeah. And then like Michael Keaton's gonna be Batman in the Flash, and then Ben Affleck's coming back in another.
And then Michael Keaton's gonna be Batman and Batgirl again.
Yes.
Oh right, yeah. There's a lot of Batman coming.
Although I'm thinking that since Batgirl is supposed to come out later this year, but now since the Flash is postponed to next year, I'm assuming then they're going to postpone Batgirl because Flash is supposed to be the reintroduction of Keaton's Batman. So it would be weird to have him pop up in Batgirl and then Flash,
Unless they do a quick rewrite because Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was supposed to come out before No Way Home. And then with COVID, they got delayed, so No Way Home came out first, and Doctor Strange is in it.
Yeah,
and I think there were some quick rewrites because not to get too far into No Way Home, but there is no reason for it to be snowing inside the Sanctum Sanctorum for one joke.
Yeah,
so that's an expensive set to spread all that snow around. If it really made me think that there's something that happens in Multiverse of Madness which was supposed to tie into that, and then they were like, well, we can't show Multiverse of Madness first, so just say the door was open.
It still could. I mean, you can make it like it could be like the movies are happening concurrently. Because there is that whole bit where Strange disappears at No Way Home, for a while.
Well, he's tied up.
Yeah, but that could be there's a story that could have been going on there that could be dealt with in Multiverse of Madness, and then you also have is the event that where Strange dealt with, reality, and yet he's a hero, according to Wanda. And Wanda's pissed that, when she messes with reality, she's a villain. Are they referring to that part in No Way Home, or is there another event that's going to take place in this movie where it's Strange doing shit again?
Yeah, I think there are probably a couple of lines rewritten for Multiverse of Madness to mention No Way Home now that it's coming out later.
I think this is one of the things I worry about with the MCU now is that it's so overplanned at this point, probably, where it's like it's kind of almost having trouble just like staying up under the weight of its own success. When Avengers came out, there wasn't like a plan beyond getting to Avengers. Thanos is thrown in. Joss Whedon says it in the director's cut or whatever, the dialogue or whatever they put on the movie where the director talks, and he basically said like, yeah, I just thought it'd be fun to throw Thanos in there. He's a big villain, so I don't know. And it's like, okay, so there wasn't a plan for this dude to show up. He shows up, and then that sets the tone for the next 10 years of Marvel movies. And it was all kind of just like building the runway as we go, you know. It's like
there wasn't 100% plan for Avengers. I remember when Marvel Studios announced Iron Man and Hulk, they said, hey, and you know, both of those are Avengers. So I think there was this feeling that they knew Avengers was going to be a much more expensive movie. So they needed to see how well Iron Man and Hulk and Captain America and Thor did if they could actually pay for the Avengers.
Yeah.
Because they could have walked away from it.
Right. I mean, if any one of those 4 movies bombed significantly, the Avengers doesn't happen. And I think that kind of goes back to this idea where it's like, you know, we're like, oh, fucking DC can't get it together. And they've got the roadmap and they own all their characters and they're all under one studio. And it's like, I don't know, maybe it's not that easy. You know, Marvel was able to pull it off, but maybe this is the universe where it worked out and the other 850 billion realities it bombed.
Yeah, I think it's a house of cards. I think you're right. You have one movie that doesn't work. And if you want to talk about the DCEU, it's Batman versus Superman. That movie doesn't work and everything collapsed. I mean, Suicide Squad's not very good. And Justice League is a schizophrenic mess if you watch the theatrical version. But Batman versus Superman is a bad movie. And they made that the foundation of their house.
Well, think too, it's like going back to when it was DC was supposed to get started with this a lot sooner, right? The idea was that they did Batman Begins, they did Superman Returns, and then they were supposed to be
Lantern.
Green Lantern. But there was supposed to be
part of this.
A Batman Superman team up movie was supposed to happen way earlier than it did, and then like the writer's strike happened. In fact, we've talked about this before on Caffeinated Comics, but if you watch I Am Legend,
Will Smith,
with Will Smith.
God
it takes place after Batman Begins came out, and it takes place after Superman Returns came out. That movie was released later, and he's walking around Times Square, and there's a poster with the Superman-Batman logo in Times Square. And this is like years and years before Batman v Superman. So they had the plans. They were ready to go, and then the writer's strike happened. It changed everything. Superman Returns didn't do as good as it did, so they canceled that sequel. And it wasn't until they rebooted everything that they kind of got their traction again. So, you know, there's been a lot of stops and starts trying to get that movie made.
There was a whole Justice League that the writer's strike killed. Remember?
Yeah, like Armie Hammer was going to be Batman, right?
George Miller directing it, which probably would have been cool in retrospect.
It would have been a lot better than the 2 Justice League movies we got.
Yeah.
It's funny because Batman versus Superman was supposed to be scheduled, I will say it was May 5th, May 4th, May 5th, May 6th, which was traditionally the Marvel date. Marvel said, no, our next Captain America movie is coming out that day. And DC moved the release date for Batman versus Superman. It was like,
they put it like a power move.
Yeah.
I think they also knew what they had because they didn't even put it out in the summer.
Yeah. Yeah, they came out right before the holiday, right? It was like
I think it was March.
Fall? March?
Yeah, I think it was very early in the year.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
It was March, of 2016. Yeah.
And it was like, oof, you did the 2 most recognized. I remember all those DC fanboys talking about how this was going to be the one that was going to, DC was going to come in, and they said it was going to beat whatever Star Wars movie was supposed to be coming out, as well as any Marvel movie. And
neither of those things.
Yeah, I think that would have been Rogue One at that time. But you know what? If you talk to those fans now, they still say the same thing, and they say #restore the Snyderverse.
Yeah.
They're making Snyder great again.
#my little brother. Anyway. All right. Well, it's I would say, okay, but back to again the Avengers and looking forward from this movie. Iron Man 2 is going to be the next one, and this is where. Iron Man 3 is going to be the next one. And this is where, again, it feels like there's, I don't know, guys, help me out here. Because one of the things that everyone likes about the Marvel movies is that they are so interconnected and things kind of relate. But then the problem with the Marvel movies is the same thing they have with the comics, is that the continuity after a while gets so to be too much, and it kind of holds everything up. And as you said, Stephen, the Marvel films, because we want them to be so interconnected, it just weighs them down. So then you're going to have Iron Man 3, which I like it more and more. The more and more I see it, I didn't like it as much the first time I saw it, but I've watched on subsequent viewings, I end up liking it more and more. Thor: The Dark World, which, yes, the next time I see it is going to be for this show. And it's like, I remember going, wow, the MCU doesn't seem as cohesive as it was before. Because with Iron Man 3, you're going to have Tony Stark getting his place, pretty much attacked by the Mandarin's forces, and none of the other Avengers, show up or say, "Hey, do you need a hand?" It's like he forgot that he had other people he could call on for help. So I'm wondering where, because that's now the thing that folks ask whenever these movies come up. It's like, why didn't so and so show up?
I remember reading an article or an interview, or there was something put out around the same time that said, "Oh, when Iron Man's house is getting blown up in Iron Man 3, Thor's on the Dark World fighting Malekith, and Captain America is dealing with helicarriers falling out of the sky in Washington, D.C. And I just find that really hard to believe when Marvel's like, all our movies take place in real time, and they come out, and that's when they came out, unless they're set in the 90s or in World War II times.
The timeline gets a little sloppy.
It does. And I think the further we go on, the further muddled things will kind of get, just because it's like at some point it's unsustainable, right? You're putting too many things together. And then even when they have the opportunity to do a movie that can kind of stand on its own and doesn't have to reference anything, like Eternals, they're kind of like, well, we're going to talk about the Avengers a bunch. And it's like, well, you don't have to, because these guys have been around for thousands of years. They have nothing to do with one another. It's like I'm hoping we'll get stuff more and more that'll reference the stuff we've already seen less and less. So like Moon Knight's about to premiere in a week, and it's tomorrow, right? So we really shouldn't have any mention. There's no need to mention the Avengers or get bogged down in Marvel continuity when we're entering a corner of the Marvel universe that's kind of its own little thing. And I like things being connected. That was big drop for me for the MCU. And I'm always looking for the next big movie to see what's the next general direction we're going in. But it is kind of nice to get these things that kind of can and should stand on their own. It'll be great to see the next Spider-Man movie, because he's got no friends. They don't know who he is. The Avengers don't know who he is. It's like, we won't have Doctor Strange or Iron Man in it. It's like, let's do a Spider-Man movie where Spider-Man stands on his own as his own hero, without this massive cast of characters around him that can bail him out if he gets in over his head.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing I'm getting tired of the MCU right now is every the original idea was that everything would kind of based on one of the titles in the Marvel universe. And initially when people were complaining around Iron Man 3 and Thor Dark World, was like, why didn't Captain America help? I'm like, well, why doesn't Captain America help Iron Man every single month in Iron Man, and Iron Man helps Captain America every single month in Captain America? That's what the Avengers are for. But we are at this point now where it's like the obligatory cameos in MCUs. It's like it's almost like if the MCU was Marvel Publishing, the only book they would be producing is Marvel Team Up. Nobody stands on their own anymore. You're absolutely right about Eternals. It's like, oh, it's Eternals, but the Black Knight isn't it? Was the Black Knight ever in the Eternals comic? Nope.
Yeah.
Ironically, he was in Avengers, yes.
Yeah, right. No, you dated Cersei for a while. It's like, that's the thing. It's like, I think we're losing the spontaneity that made the early MCU unique and kind of its own thing, where it's now become kind of almost a parody of itself. And it's something where I remember telling my roommates, oh, you guys got to see the new Thor movie. And they're like, Thor sucks. I'm like, no, Thor Ragnarok. This is a great movie. They totally changed direction, new director. You guys love this director. And they're like, well, what do we need to know to watch the movie? And I'm like, nothing. It's like Thor is on Asgard. His brother Loki is the bad guy. That's all you need to know. And we started the movie, and then Doctor Strange showed up, and they're like, who the fuck is that guy? And I'm like, fuck, all right. Hang on a second. I got to pause the movie and then explain who this fucking guy is. And he's only going to be in the movie for 5 minutes, but it immediately turns people off. I think when they want to look into this movie, if you haven't been following these movies like we have as they come out in real time, well, now it's like homework, right? You got to watch 20 movies to catch up to figure out what's going on. And you just kind of wonder about the people who were born after these movies came out, 10 years ago or whatever. And now how do you even catch up? I look back and I'm like, well, if I want to watch everything since Endgame, that's like 4 movies and 5 shows in a year. It's like that is a lot to do in a very short amount of time if you wanted to get caught up on stuff. So revisiting things like I used to when the MCU was spread out a lot more and you'd only get 2 movies a year instead of 4 a year, it's kind of like it makes it harder, I think, for new fans to get into it. So that's kind of the idea, is hopefully we'll see stuff that's a little bit more disconnected from like the main continuity, even though I like that stuff and I want to see that continue. It's like, well, I'm not the target audience at all. The general public is.
I propose, though, just as a running gag, that when they finally do introduce the new X-Men, whoever is cast as Wolverine, have Wolverine appear in every freaking movie from there on, like he does in every freaking comic book.
But he has to wear a mask.
He has to wear a mask.
Yeah, put him a mask at least.
10 years of Hugh Jackman not wearing a mask.
Oh man! But and Dave, Stephen, thank you so much for describing how daunting this show is going to be once we pass Endgame.
Yeah, good luck. You guys got a lot of work to do. Maybe what they should do is do what they used to do in the comics, is every time they mention something in the movie, just have a little box. It's like an asterisk. See, Avengers, Age of Ultron, it's like, just do that. They could do it in Disney Plus, and then it's a link you click on and you can watch the movie, You know
what? In the 2000s, Marvel went to the recap page.
Oh, yeah.
Page. Maybe they just do a Star Wars scroll all the time.
Yeah.
It's Disney Plus does that, though. I remember when WandaVision premiered, and at the end, once WandaVision was over, it's like, up next, Age of Ultron. They knew that if you wanted to see how Wanda's story,
they know where to point you. Yeah. They even started doing those Marvel Legends or whatever. It's like, so Winter Soldier, Falcon and Winter Soldier comes out. So there's like, here's everything you need to know about these 2 characters that take place in this movie. And I think that's helpful. Obviously guys like us don't really need it, but maybe that is something where the general fans who are kind of watching these things, like my dad he can't follow all this shit. You know what I mean? So it's like, he leaves it to me to like watch them and be like, oh, you'll like this one, Dad. Watch this. It's not complicated. There's no space gods in it or a talking tree.
I was going to say, nowadays, like, every movie just kind of feels like a commercial for the next one. I mean, the case in point, No Way Home, the post-credit scene was a trailer for Multiverse of Madness, literally a trailer. Everything else before, anytime there's a mid or post-credit scene, unless it's like a little jokey thing that they do once in a while, it's something kind of alluding to what could happen in the next movie. They were pretty shameless about it. The post-credit scene for No Way Home was literally
a trailer. Yeah, and I think they did that. I think Captain America ends with the trailer for Avengers.
Yes.
Oh,
if I'm not mistaken, the first Avengers. So it's not the first time they've done it, but you're just kind of like, it was a cool idea when they initially did it. When Nick Fury shows up at the end of Iron Man, that is like the end credit scene of all end credit scenes. It was massive, and the implications we're still dealing with. But it's like when they do it in every movie, it's just kind of like, it's like I could really do without him at this point, I think.
Yeah.
But now they've got you. You've got to get something, though. You've got to get they call a stinger. You got to get something, because people sit through those credits. And I think, remember at the end of Endgame, Everyone sat
didn't.
through those credits waiting for that post credit, and there was nothing there. And people were like,
Yeah.
"What?"
And I like that. It was nice not knowing what was coming next. We know enough with like we can tell you what the next 10 Marvel movies are going to be. You know, they've all been announced. We know what's coming. We know the dates they're going to be released. You don't have to do end credits anymore. We live in a different world than we did when that first Iron Man movie came out. So I agree. I think people expect it, but I was refreshed when Endgame didn't do it. I was actually kind of like, no, this is nice to not know like what's coming next. Technically, it's like you know what the movie's going to be, but like we still don't know the general direction of where the MCU is going from here. Like, what are we building towards? Well, this multiverse thing, okay, but that's one more movie, and then that's it. Thanos was a long, slow build before they got around to doing them properly.
We don't know because it sounds like Ant-Man 3 is going to be very multiverse focused, and that's after Doctor Strange has a movie called The Multiverse of Madness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe this is the new normal.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times I have to remind myself that the whole the whole Infinity War storyline took them a long time to finally get to the end. And then you've already, the big bad in these next few phases is going to be Kang, and dealing with multiverses and all the stories until you finally have that big, confrontation with Kang at the end, and however they decide to do it. I will make the prediction right now: Multiverse of Madness. The stinger will be Deadpool appearing, and people are going to lose their minds.
Well, Sean Levy was just named as the director of Deadpool 3.
Yep.
And Sean Levy and Ryan Reynolds have a long history now. They're like Adam McKay and Will Ferrell. They did Free Guy together, which is a great movie, that's on Disney Plus. And then I just watched The Atom Project, which they did together.
Yep.
And Mark Ruffalo's in it, and it was really good. And it's like, and so obviously Ryan Reynolds trusts this guy enough for him to go to Disney and go, I'm working with this guy again. And I think them naming him as director means that we're getting it.
Yeah, we're definitely getting it, the Deadpool 3. But now's when you can start. Now you can start with Deadpool. He can be the character that drops in from time to time, and also softens the ground for when the X-Men. Well, because let's say Professor X does appear in Multiverse of Madness. Okay, I've seen more promo artwork of Doctor Strange standing before these shadowy figures that are probably the Illuminati, and in the center is someone in a wheelchair that looks a lot like Patrick Stewart as Professor X. So you're already softening the ground now to bring the X-Men into the MCU. You bring Deadpool in; he's perfect for this, And there's so many folks who have said Deadpool can now take the place of the Stan Lee cameo. You could bring him in, boom, do a bit here and there, and not skip a beat, and people will go, oh, that'll be the next thing you're talking about, and you can easily set up Deadpool 3 by getting him in, having him do brief cameos in all these, Disney MCU films, which I wanted to say earlier, because the difference between, let's say, a movie like Avengers, which, as you guys have already said, was it was created by it was made by Marvel Films, distributed by Paramount, which is why you have the big Paramount mountain in the beginning. But now that Disney owns the Marvel brand, the Marvel Studios, quite frankly, they don't need these movies to make $400 million, $500, or $1 billion each time out, because they are already making that kind of money on the licensing, which is what Disney wants. So just crank out another movie, because we can make new toys. You can always tell the next Marvel movie, you can tell not so much by the trailers, but by walking down the toy aisle in Walmart and Target. See all
that's if they're in stock, because I usually just find the empty pegs.
I saw the Multiverse of Madness figures. I'm like, oh, those are pretty good. Those are pretty nice. I almost got the Doctor Strange, but again, I have so much stuff I'm trying to get rid of that even when I try to get rid of, my friends bring me more stuff.
Against your will.
Against my damn will.
I always get demoralized when I walk through the toy aisle and how lame Batman toys are nowadays. Like in the 90s, they used to be really cool and like didn't like actually thought something of kids' intelligence, like the Legends of the Dark Knight toy or Legends of Batman, where it was like Batman throughout history. Now they're just so like cheap and generic looking. It's disappointing.
Yeah, that's funny because the Legends of the Dark Knight line was Kenner's attempt, because Kenner still existed, to copy McFarlane, and now McFarlane does Batman, and they're not as cool as Kenner copying McFarlane.
Well, so there was the Legends of the Dark Knight, which looked like McFarlane, like Spawn toy. And then a couple years before that, there was Legends of Batman, which was like Batman dropped into different like time periods.
It'd be like a pirate Batman.
Yeah. I had like all of those toys. They were so cool.
They were awesome. Yeah.
That's where they snuck in like comic characters too. That was like the first.
It was like the first
Nightwing.
Yeah, and the the purple suit Catwoman, like the way
they were all posed like this.
Yeah.
So you can move this arm like
they could do one thing.
This arm like this. They were fun, Dave.
It was it's funny because I saw the DC Universe toys are pretty cool. I saw some Batmans that were cool. They had the black suited Superman, which looked like a cross between like a Bruce Timm Superman, but in the black suit. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really. I almost bought that one, but I was like,
they did a good job with Robert Pattinson. I was really happy with the Batman they did for that movie.
Yeah,
there's those Batman the multiverse ones you're describing, Elliott. There's one that it's Batman designed by Todd McFarlane, and it's really cool. Like he's got all these different gadgets and stuff that attach on his utility belt.
They also did a deluxe, like $50 Target exclusive that was Batman drawn by McFarlane when McFarlane was drawing Batman in the 80s.
Okay.
It's totally different. The cape is this long.
Yeah. There's a cool I saw it just this past week. A cool RC, remote control Batmobile from the Batman, but it's not much larger than say a Hot Wheels car. And it has the little remote control thing about the size of a video game controller. I almost bought that. I was like, that's different because normally when you see RC cars, they're really big.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's small. It's like, so, you don't need a big, thing. Sweet.
God.
Yeah.
So folks, for folks who are listening to the podcast, you don't see this, but on the live stream, yes, John just pulled out the McFarlane Batman, which is really cool. Which is why you really need to watch these live streams, folks. If you're just listening to the podcast, you're missing out.
Yeah, John's got all kinds of props over there.
Yeah.
I live alone.
Well, so do I. Yeah. But my house is a mess. You have all your guitars nicely displayed behind you, and you walk into John's apartment, and it feels kind of like a cross between, a high-end comic shop and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Because, all his guitars are up on the walls, and then he has all his omnibuses nicely on shelves, and all the figures are around posed. I'm like, oh, man, this dude. You're living the life I wish I'd
living the dream.
You should see it when the boys leave.
It's just a disaster.
We made the mistake of moving the Legos over here.
Martin Kelly agrees with me. Yes, I think Elliott is correct. Deadpool will show up. You want to get mentioned on this show, just say that you agree with me. And and also thank you, Martin. Yes. Awesome prop. That's why I watch the live stream versus listening to the podcast. But not everyone catches the live stream, mind you. You can watch the archives of these videos on our Facebook page, on our Twitch page, on our YouTube page. They're there. Twitch, unfortunately, only keeps the last 2 or 3. So if you want to go back further to the beginning, go to facebook.com/MCU ReVU. That's MCU ReVU, as well as twitch.tv/MCU ReVU. And if you go to youtube.com, just do a search for MCU ReVU. It'll take you to the page. Takes you all the way back to the beginning when we reviewed Iron Man 1. You can also listen to the audio version of this show on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. All you've got to do is tell your smart speaker, play the Caffeinated Comics podcast, And boom, the latest episode. This audio of this show will premiere next week on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. You can listen to us then on your smart speaker or anywhere podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So, closing thoughts on the Avengers. I'll start with you, Stephen.
Well, I'd say it still holds up. I think I tried to look for something. I'm like, what didn't you like about this? And I don't like Jeremy Renner at all. And
even after the Disney Plus Hawkeye show?
Yeah, even after that.
Because I warmed up to him in that.
Yeah, he's better in that because he gets a little bit more to do. It's not entirely his fault because Robert Downey Jr. stole Hawkeye's personality for Iron Man. Is like the jerk that gives everyone attitude. So I'd say that's kind of my only complaint really about it. I thought initially the opening was going to be a bit slow, but I don't know. It's like I miss like evil Loki. And as soon as he shows up, I'm like, holy shit, this guy's he's gonna get up to some shenanigans here. So I enjoy it. I think it still holds up. It's definitely still in my top 3 or 4 MCU movies. I just think it's like it didn't have all the advantages the further ones did of having all this backstory to be able to build up to. And as we've discussed on this episode, it really, really could have been an absolute shit show, and it wasn't. And thank God.
Dave?
Yeah, I echo what you guys have said about this movie. I think it's held up well. Good. I think it does a good job balancing the screen time amongst all the characters. It's a good introduction to Mark Ruffalo's Bruce Banner. Like you said, Elliott, if someone had not seen Iron Man 2, it also serves as a satisfying introduction to Black Widow as well. The effects are still pretty good. 10 years later, sometimes even just a short period of time, it's easy for effects in these big budget spectacle movies to age poorly, but this one still looks good. A lot of great moments. I love that. I think we mentioned it earlier in the show, that iconic shot of the Avengers assembled in the streets of New York and the camera just rotates around them. I think that's one of the more lasting shots of all these MCU films that just kind of sticks with you. And then, of course, they return to it in Endgame. They reference it. I think it was a great capper for the phase 1 of the MCU.
John?
This is the one that changes everything. This is we're never going to look at a Marvel movie the same after this. We're not going to see anything like we saw in phase 1. They really cracked the code. And it just reminds me, because I'm surrounded by toys from our conversation, I just picked up, this is the Hulk from this Avengers. And at the time, Hasbro was not producing Marvel Legends when Avengers came out. They had decided to make everything 3 3/4 like the old Star Wars, which were okay. But then because Avengers was a big deal, they did these as Walmart exclusives. And they were so popular that by the end of that year, they had brought Marvel Legends back. And now they have made thousands of Marvel Legends, both from the comic books and the movies. There are full sets that are just Disney Plus characters. And that's another thing that Avengers changed. For Iron Man 2 and Thor Dark World and Captain America, there were no Marvel Legends. There's Marvel before Avengers and there's Marvel after. And Marvel before Avengers is almost nothing, because the movies they were producing, as we said, they were just trying to get up to the level of X-Men or Ghost Rider or Daredevil, these movies that other studios were making. Now they know what to do. And as we said before, now everybody's trying to follow them.
I agree with all you guys. I have nothing new to add. I will say, though, moving forward, we have just concluded phase 1 of the MCU ReVU's trek through the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Next up will be, of course, phase 2, starting off with Iron Man 3, where we will have more guests joining us from around the worlds of comedy, creativity, media, television, and sports. We've got lots of great folks lined up. I know John's got folks from the world of stand-up comedy that are going to be joining us. Dave has got some friends from the Shaken Not Heard roster and beyond are going to be joining us. And of course, Stephen, you're always welcome to come back. But again, pencil thin mustache.
We're Avengers movies.
Yeah, really. Stephen
true.
must wear the pencil thin mustache and a tuxedo to really bring home the Howard Stark, the young Howard Stark look.
Let's see what I can do. No promises.
And thank you, everyone. Susan Lehman, thank you to everyone who's watching us on the Twitch screen. Martin, thank you so much for being here. Polar Knights, thank you for joining us on Twitch. We appreciate everyone who commented, who's watching. We see the numbers here in our little counter. But if you missed this, of course, if you're watching the rebroadcast, if you're watching one of our archived videos, we appreciate that too. If you like these videos, please give them a thumbs up. Feel free to comment. Feel free, hey, if you have any feedback or comments of your own that you'd like to share, you can always email us at mcurevu@gmail.com. We read every email that we get. Also, again, you can listen to the audio version of the show on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. Gentlemen, tell us where we can see you on social media. Start with you, Stephen.
You can find me on Instagram and YouTube occasionally at The Brave Butter Pecan.
And you folks, if you haven't seen Stephen's videos on the history of different comic characters and pop culture, definitely check that out. Can I tell you something? They're great videos. Your YouTube videos are sorely underviewed. Those views should be way, way more than they are, and they definitely need tons of likes and shares. So, folks,
appreciate the kind words.
But no, I'm telling you, I like it, and I don't lie, and I'm also glad that they're good because I hate telling people
to go watch trash.
Right. If you suck, I'm just not going to say anything.
Right. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he's got videos, but I don't talk about that. Dave.
I am on Instagram at Pinto_noir.
You definitely want to check out Dave's Instagram and see pictures of his dog. Ooh, that little gremlin. I love that little gremlin. John?
I'm at Not in My Book on Twitter and Instagram, where you can currently see me yelling at Will Smith. And then, as you said, the Caffeinated Comics audio podcast, which will be carrying this, is also on Facebook at facebook.com/caffeinatedcomics.
And I am at Elliott Serrano on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also go to my Facebook page, King of Geeks Chicago. Of course, there is the MCU ReVU Facebook page and the Shaken Not Heard Facebook page where you can watch Dave and I and other guests. John's dropped in on the show when we've talked about all the James Bond movies, starting with Dr. No through No Time to Die. We will be producing new shows coming up. Of course, when more Bond news hits the wires, we'll be talking about who's being recast as Bond. We also have some reviews of other Bond media, such as the comic books, as well as some extraneous stuff. We're going to look at King of Spies, the Bond-inspired comic book by Mark Miller that he wrote with Netflix, in a partnership with Netflix, which unfortunately is not going to end up being a series or a movie. Apparently, Netflix already killed it. But fun comic. We'll talk about it. Would have been nice to see Pierce Brosnan in that role. Who knows? Anyway, until next time, folks, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for watching the MCU ReVU. And remember, if someone makes a joke about you or your wife, be funnier. Just be funnier. Don't resort to violence, folks. That's really low class. Take care, everyone.